What is going on, guys? This is CodedSteele, and welcome back for yet another App Inventor tutorial. Um, Forget what I've ever said about any App Inventor tutorial that I have done so far. This is by far, at least this is in my opinion, obviously, I think the coolest tutorial that I am gonna do, at least thus far. Um, it was literally going to be taking this profile page app that I created in a later episode. It is going to be essentially taking that and adapting it into a web-based profile page, which will allow multiple users to use that data, this profile pages. So obviously, you guys can see there's a significant advantage to that because of the fact of the matter that um, now it's not just one person. I've kind of slowly worked things in. You guys saw me in the past. I had a login. Now then I did multiple logins. Somebody asked me to do profile pages. I think I got somebody asked me to do multiple logins too. So I did all of that. Now I'm putting all of that stuff together into one app and bringing web stuff into it. And I think this just is really, really cool. And you can actually do a lot with it. You could actually take what I'm going to show you today and put this in your own app. For instance, for if you have a company or something like that or whatever, everybody can have their own profile and whatever else, and then you can do stuff inside of the app. But anyways, let me put that stuff aside for a second. I have reached a new milestone. I now have 200 subscribers, and that is a significant boost. It seems like the audience has been growing over the past few months, like at an exponential rate, and I understand it's all due to you guys and your support. I want to continue, as always, I will continue to thank you guys probably every single episode for all of the support you've given me thus far. Uh, as always, I'm here to help you. If you guys have any questions, please email me at codedsteele@gmail.com or leave a comment. If there's something that, a specific topic that I can cover a little more clearly, please let me know, and I will try to get back to you on that. And I know I have a few people who've been asking me for a few things. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to that stuff, but this takes a little bit of time. This app especially took me a little bit of time because it was quite complicated to get this all to finally work the way I expected it to work. But I finally got it working, and there were quite a few roadblocks that I ran into, but I'm going to share those all with you guys so you don't run into those same roadblocks. But anyways, enough about all that stuff. Do one last thing before we get actually into this. Please make sure you pay very, very close attention, because I've said in the past, if you can't follow, if you're not following something, my apologies, but this is, I at least think, was extremely complicated to even get working, and I had to really think it through just to figure out how to get everything to work correctly. If there's any potential for confusion, it definitely will be in this app, but I will try to lay it out as cleanly as I possibly can to you guys. Anyways, we wasted enough time with that. Let's get started. You guys should already have, if you followed along with me in a past tutorial, you should already have a login interface that looks similar to this. But what you might not have is you might not have this tiny web database component put in and this clock component put in. So if you don't, you're going to need to drag those in. So hopefully you guys by this point know how to make this type of an interface. If you don't, if you're starting from scratch, that's fine. You should be able to drag this stuff in and make this happen. But to get the tiny web database, you go under the storage, you drag that in, and then to get the clock, you go under sensors, and there's a clock, and you just drag that right in. Oh, and just a little side note, they added a new component that we will probably be discussing in a later episode, but that's neither here nor there right now. So once you have the clock and the tiny database, the most important thing to do here now, well, there's two things you got to do. After you get this stuff looking alike, the clock, it might not be clear as to why we have a clock in here, but it will be very shortly, I promise you. But but you need to make sure that this timer enabled box is unchecked, and that's going to disable the timer. And what that allows us to do is we're going to be able to control when the timer fires in the actual block logic, but we don't want it to fire all the time. We just want it to fire when we tell it to fire. So in order to do that, we disable it, and then we can enable it when we want it to be enabled, and then it will count, and then it'll fire when we want it to. So just make sure you uncheck that box. And the other thing is this tiny web database. We have this thing called the service URL. Now, you do not have to set the service URL from here. You can set it inside of the blocks editor if you so wish to do, but I mean, why would you? Honestly, I don't even know why they kind of added it in there. Maybe just because whatever. but they did. So you can set the service URL in here if you want to, but I mean, once you set it, I don't think you're going to be changing it in your code. I don't know, maybe somebody would have a reason for having multiple databases in one thing. I don't know, but I would think, once you set your service URL, you're good to go. So the service URL I am using, and you guys are welcome to use the same service URL if you prefer, or you can use the one that you created if you followed along with me in the tutorial number 8, creating a web database, which will show you how to create your own service database like this. But I had Google auto-generate us a service database, and I chose this. Well, didn't choose it. It chose this Mindful Genius 839 at AppSpot, or not at AppSpot, .appspot.com. So that's the service URL I'm going to be making use of, which we can see it right here. That's the service URL I'm going to be using. So once all of that stuff is set, that's pretty much all you need to worry about with that. As I've said before, if you followed along in the multiple logins or registration with any of the login type stuff, you've probably seen something similar to this. Nothing new here. We just have the notifier component. All of that stuff should be similar to what you guys have seen in the past. And then finally, the profile screen. If you have not watched my profile videos, that might be something you might be interested in watching, because it'll actually show me laying all this stuff out if you even care to watch that, or you can just make it look like this right now. So that was the profile thing. So now that I kind of showed you guys what all of the screens need to look like, we need to get into the actual logic that controls this whole entire program, and it is unbelievably, complicated, honestly. But it's actually not as bad as it looks. I have these blocks up there disabled. Clock 1, timer fired, all of this stuff over here. Yeah, so this is all of the code, and we're going to go through each and every single piece of it. So these are just a bunch of variables. If you guys were following me in the regular profile pages, you probably remember me just having, I think, the user variable, and that probably was it. I think I might have had the user and the password. I don't think I had any of this stuff. Trust me, you need to add this stuff in here, and the reason why is because of the fact of the way the web database works. Everything, when you access a web database, there's a certain delay. There's a certain amount of time it takes to access that information. So since there's a certain amount of time that it takes to do that, we also, when the timing interval happens, we need to do all of our assignments at that time. And that's what all of this stuff is, but we'll more on that later. How this code actually works is we can see it right here. When the login button is pushed, so the login button on the main screen, we're going to go ahead and we're going to call tinywebdatabase.getValue. What you need to notice, and you might notice right away, is that this block doesn't have the little socket plug like this. If you guys remember, the tiny web database had the little puzzle plug on the end of it like that, and automatically allowed you to do an assignment right away. The reason that doesn't happen with this is because the way they set this up, and it's the way the web works, it kind of makes sense, and at the same time it doesn't. I wish they would have just made it to where the app freezes until the information is gathered, and then it continues doing the rest of the logic. They don't do it that way. They call this immediately, and then immediately they run the rest of the code in the loop. So that obviously added a little bit of a challenge to the way I had to code this, because now I have to add some form of a delay somewhere to wait for the information to return from the database. So that's where the clock is going to come in, but more on that later. So we have to do this get value, and I use this tag and I say textbox1 and password textbox. So that is essentially your username and your password. I created a tag and we have it set for username and password. So what we're looking for is we're looking for that tag to exist in the database. Now, what you need to understand right here, and honestly, I don't know if I should be starting right at this point, but from the registration screen that we saw before, when you first start the app, there are no entries. Ideally, there's no entries in the database. Sure enough, we could go into this tab and we could say store a value, and we could create a tag or something if we wanted to, but ideally, there is not a there is no username or no password the first time you use the database. We're just going to assume it's a blank sheet. There's nothing there. So since there's nothing there, there's nothing to log into. There's no login screen. There's no profile. There's no nothing. So when you first log in the app, it's probably going to be best for somebody to go ahead and click that registration button that was on the main screen, which you guys saw right here. So we would click the register button, and then we would go back in, or it would take us to this registration screen. So this is the logic that drives the registration screen. It's a simple thing. You guys have seen this already if you've watched any of my creating a multiple logins tutorial, blah, blah, blah. Basically, these are just looking for the username, two new username values to match. So we make them enter the username twice to make sure those values match, because obviously we want it to where somebody knows exactly, what their username is. They don't want to be entering in something incorrectly or typing the wrong letter once or something. So that hopefully prevents that stuff from happening. And then the same thing with password. We want to make sure to confirm the password, blah, blah, blah. If those two values match, then we return the actual username and the password to the the screen that opened this one. And the screen that opened this one is the main screen where you hit the register button. So that information goes back to that screen. If they don't match, we say one or more of the fields don't match. So basically, you might want to clear out all the information in the cells and start over. So, that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, this is where stuff is not probably as straightforward. So now we go back to the screen one. And screen one, whenever we finish registration, it goes over here. And the first thing it does is it goes ahead and it looks at this and it says, well, what screen did I return to? Did I return from the registration screen or did I return from the profile screen? Well, I returned from the registration screen. And the other thing we have in here is this result is not null. The reason I have that there is because if the user hits the back button, it automatically returns an error and the app freezes up and it closes out automatically. It closes itself automatically. So basically the app errors out. This is to prevent it from erroring out. So if it's null, then don't call this line of code at all. So there is a problem. If you try to call a null tag, it's going to tell you, yeah, you can't call a null out of a database. So that's not going to work very well there, sonny boy. So that's why it doesn't let that happen. So what happens here now? Let's just assume obviously the information is not null because we don't want it to be. So somebody enters in a valid username and password. It's going to go ahead and it's going to construct a tag based on that username and that password. So this is the username and this is the password, and that all has to deal with the order that we send the information back. Remember, we sent textbox1 first, then password textbox. So this is where the textbox ends up. That's where the password textbox ends up. So we join those two strings together. This takes the raw string of those things, compiles them together with no space in between, and creates a tag. So that is the tag that the database will use. As we can see here, I have my name and 5, my real name and 5 here, and it takes and it compiles those into a string, and allows that to be the tag for the database. Whenever we want to access that tag, we would just say call the tag Justin5, and then it would access that tag. So value to store is a little bit more we have to think about. If you guys remember, I think in the actual profile pages app, I had this called multiple times. That causes an issue with the web database, and the reason why that does is because, remember, there's a certain delay. It takes a certain amount of time to read information out of the internet. It's not like it's instantaneous. When we're doing it on our app, it can do it right away because that information is local to the tablet. It's already there. It just has to look in the certain spot where it stored that information, and it just yanks it out of that spot in memory and places it for our app to be able to make use of. Same thing. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen quite the same way with a web database, because what do we got to do? We're saying, okay, look on the internet for this stuff. Okay, well, now I've got to go to that URL. And then once I go to that URL, once I finally connect, if you're even connected to the internet, which you guys obviously have to be connected to the internet for this app to work, but if you're even connected to the internet, or once you get to that URL is what I meant to say, now I've got to look for it. So there's two steps. First, I got to find that database, and then after I find it, then I got to surf it for that tag. With the tablet, since everything's already stored, or with the actual local database is what I meant to say, the information's already stored there, so it doesn't have to do a lot. It takes one step out of the equation. All it has to do is look for the tag. It doesn't have to access some kind of online server and find, the URL and then do it. It just says, okay, blah blah blah, there it is, take it. So that's the difference between a local database and a tiny web or I don't know, I keep saying it tiny, whatever, just a web database. So that's the main difference right there. So since that works that way, it's better for us to, instead of calling this multiple times and trying to find a way to make delays happen with all that stuff, I just make it all into one big array, or they call it a list in here, which list and array are very, very similar things. So they make it into a list. And this list, for me, I go ahead and I say, all right, well, I'm going to take the username, the password, and the word user, and I'm going to make them all into one string. And then I'm going to do the same thing, except for I'm going to make the password first, the username first, and the password here. I'm not really going to explain this. If you guys want to figure out why I used this in this specific way, you guys need to check out some of my past login tutorials, and it will explain why I added all this extra stuff in here. It's basically to make it to where the username can only be entered in the username block and the password can only be entered in the password block. But there's a little more to it than that. Watch the videos. That's all I can say. And then the other things are just these none tags. And all of these none tags are the defaults for the database. Not database, the profile page. So if we go to the profile page here, that's where all these nuns, there's none by default there, but we still have to pass it a none anyway, because if we don't, it's going to make it to where blanks will appear there, and it'll all essentially be these bold headings all be so close to each other and whatever else. So I do it like that to make it to where it kind of fixes that stuff from happening. So let's not go to that screen yet. So that's why the none tags are there, is so there's already a placeholder for the profile headline, the birthday, job, skills, hobbies, all of that stuff. So once you register, all of that stuff you have now a tag created for that user in the database, and now that person can log in and modify their profile page. So that's how that all works. Once somebody's in the database, then it's all a matter of just saying, okay, enter the stuff in, call it, look for it, and then it enables the timer, which we're going to explain next, and then it also sets this text to logging in. That's a friendly thing to let you know, okay, it's logging in. It's actually trying to log you in. Give it a second. Don't push the button repeatedly. Just let it do what it's got to do until it's done. So this is what happens here. we say this call get value and we set this timer enable to true. What we're essentially trying to do here is we're trying to make it to where the app is not going to do anything else. It's not even going to attempt to log in until the value is returned. We don't know exactly how long it takes to access that value, but what we can do is we can guess at a certain amount of time longer than what we're positive. Okay, let's just say it takes, half a second. Well, if I set it to a full second, then I know at least the data is going to be retrieved before it does anything. So that's why I left it to the default as a full second. But when this get value is called and this timer is enabled, it already in the background starts looking. It goes to, or it already not, sorry, it doesn't go straight to here, but it already in the background starts going to the URL, this URL, and looking for the tag. And as soon as it finds that tag, it reads the value that is stored. In this case, it's a list, so it reads everything in that list. And once it reads it all, then it says, okay, I got the value, great, let's do some stuff. So I have this if statement for is a list just to kind of say, okay, is this thing actually a list? Because if it's not, I don't want to do all this stuff because it's not a list. I can't select the item in that list and then grab its information. So I check to make sure it's a list first before I go ahead and do stuff with the thing that I would automatically claim as a list. So we go ahead, we read the username, password, profile headline, birth date, job, skills, hobbies. Remember, all of that stuff is none by default. So when you first log into the app, this is none, 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 none. But once you enter something, then it will be saved, and in the future, it'll no longer be none. It will be whatever you want it to be, or whatever whatever you programmed into the profile. So that's all of that. Basically summed up, it pulls all that information and puts it in these variables. Now we assume that this is done on the order of maybe we'll call it a half a second. So since that's all done in a half a second, okay, now we're still waiting. We're waiting. Okay, it's been a full second. Guess what? Boom, this thing triggers. So it goes ahead and it says, boom, timer has gone off. It's been a whole second. Hopefully you had enough time to get the information out of the database, which for every time I've tried this, we have had enough time. So I'm assuming a second should be fine in everybody's cases. So we immediately set the timer enabled back to false. The reason we do that is because you don't want this timer firing multiple times. If you go into another screen, it will continue to fire if you do not disable it. Literally, clocks are something that as long as the app is running and you have it enabled, it'll even fire from your home screen on your app if you let it. So I don't want it to. I don't want it to fire any more than I want it. I want to be in complete control of when it does stuff. So that's why I immediately set it back to false. So it will not fire once except for this one time. So now I do an if statement check here. And this is basically just to check and make sure the login information is correct. Is the login information from the database that we're retrieving match what we expect it to be? This is another one of those things, like I said, check out my past login videos. You'll understand all of this stuff here. So once that's done, we set this text back to empty. That's more or less just kind of like a cleanup or housekeeping type thing. We don't want it to say logging in when I go back to the screen before. We want it to just not say anything at all unless you're actually logging in. So I just set it back to empty so it's kind of out of everybody's way. And then it opens the profile screen and passes all of the information that it retrieved from the database. I could have used user and pass here just the same way I used all of these, but I don't know, I just grabbed, I kind of recycled this app from my offline profile pages, so that's why it's a lot of a mix of what was there originally. So I took that stuff and passed that all back to this page. Now, here's the other part of this. Let's say the timer goes off, but we were not able to retrieve any information from the database. since we weren't able to retrieve any information, what we automatically assume, well, we're not assuming, we know that the login failed. Now, it could have failed for a number of reasons. It could have failed because you're not connected to the internet. It could have failed because it didn't have enough time to grab the information out of the database. I think that's unlikely. I don't think that'll happen. As long as you're connected to the internet, it should have plenty. A second should be a way more than enough time to get the information out of the database. So that should never happen. Or you had your login information wrong. So you either had your login information wrong, or there was nothing stored. There was no user. That username was not stored in the database. Those are really the two things you're going to run into. So whatever the case may be, the login failed, and for one of those two reasons, more than likely. So we're not going to let the person log in and view a profile page because they don't have one and they're not registered. So we just say login failed, and but obviously we're assuming, okay, they did have an account, so they actually got in and are able to go ahead and modify all of the stuff. So now we need to go to, man, this feels like it's taking a while. Yeah, all right, we're going to try to finish this up here in a few minutes. Not back to the screen, it goes to the profile screen. So the profile screen, this is where all of the information comes in. This screen should be nothing new. If you guys had my profile, watch the profile headlines pages video, and this code is pretty much the exact same with a few minor modifications. This is all pretty much the same. I'm pulling all the start values. Instead of, I think I had 6 before, now I have 7 because I also need to read the password in. So that's the modification there. I added this password variable as well. So those are the changes there. Nothing drastic, but now we have 7 values instead of 6 there. So it loads all those values. The other thing, obviously, here, just like we had before, whenever the button is clicked, it's going to allow somebody to edit certain information. And then once they're done editing, they can hit it again and it will save it. And when it saves, it goes down to this loop, passes all that information back to the main page, and then processes it in the same way, which we're going to discuss right now. I'm not going to spend any more time on this page because my profile pages app completely explains the functionality of this. So now back to screen 1 to discuss the last part of the app that we need to discuss, and that is this chunk. Whenever we edit something and we're coming back from that screen, anytime we've made a change, which if we don't make a change, then obviously we're not going to do anything because this is going to be empty. We're not going to even call this loop at all. But if we did make a change, we did do something, we want to update everything. So in order to update everything, we need to construct a tag. Well, we want to construct the same tag as the username and password. Remember, username and password were the first two indexes in the list that we returned from the previous page. We can see that right here, that user pass, the first two things there. All right, so back to that screen. All right, so we're constructing the same tag that we had up here because we want that information to get saved to the same spot. Okay, cool enough. All right, the other thing we need to deal with is this. This is essentially the same thing that this is doing right here. It's constructing a unique identifier that this check can perform. Again, check out a previous video for that. This information right here is all profile headline, birth date, jobs, skills, and hobbies. It pulls all that information out and stores it in the array, much like what we see here. That's how all that storage happens. So hopefully you guys were able to follow all of that. It is probably one of the more sophisticated. This is a block of code that I kind of commented out, and I'll kind of explain that in just a second. But hopefully this all makes sense to you guys. Let's do a demo because that is the most explanatory thing that you can do, or it will actually show you guys what the heck this thing actually does. So come on. thing follow me here? Are you gonna follow me? Why is it? Okay, there it goes. Finally caught up. Wow, what was going on with that? All right, not that one. Web profile pages. Okay. Just so you guys are, we're going to do this completely from scratch. We're going to assume that nobody is registered in the database, which we're going to have nobody registered right now. So now there's no information in the database at all. So we have to go ahead and we have to register. So we're going to register, and I'm going to register as CS, and obviously we have to confirm the username. I'm going to type in, I don't know, for a password 5 again, because that's what I used before, but you can go ahead and do whatever you want, obviously. And then I'm going to hit this registration key. Well, it went back to the main page. Did it do anything? It doesn't look like it did, but let's refresh the page. Oh, look at that. It actually stored a value in there when we did that. It looks like it created a user. So let's see if it actually does anything for us here. CS5, does it log us in? It logs us in. Great. So as you guys can see, there was a little bit of a delay there. It said logging in, and then it waits that second. Remember, that second is because we can't access the information right away. Let me just prove that I can edit this data and that it saves, blah, 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 blah. Save. All right. Great, we are back to our main page here. Let me just prove, obviously, that it does the same checks. You're going to try to log in. Login failed. Login's failed because there is no register HJ. So it's not going to do anything. But there is, however, a user CS5. Log in, and there is all of our profile information that we created before, a bunch of D's, J's, and H's, but obviously it's gibberish, but you can essentially put in your own information and it will be stored there. So in the same regard, I can go ahead and I can create another user. Let me just show that. 7. Let me just, show that that's possible and that there's multiple users can exist in this same app. This is a new user, so he has no information entered for him, but I can still go back to my previous user and log in, and his information is still there. So that's kind of how you go ahead and you create your own profile thing. One thing that's worth mentioning, and I didn't add this modification, and I'm not going to because I don't have enough time, but you do have to remember, if somebody enters in the same username and same password as a user that already exists in the database, it has the potential to overwrite that username and that password through the registration screen. So obviously that we don't really want that to happen. How could we prevent something like that? Well, it's actually I can do it, I could add it, but I'm just going to explain how you would do it. Essentially what you would do is you would go to the registration screen, you would add another tiny web database component in there, and when the username and the password is being entered, you would construct that tag and you would search for the existence of that tag. And if that tag exists, then you would say user already exists. So you would add another notifier component, else if statement, and you would say user already exists in database or something to that effect. So you would obviously have to add another clock here as well. You need to have another tiny web database and a clock component to make that happen. But you can essentially check for the existence of another user right here on the registration screen. So that is how you would make it to where your old user cannot get overridden. Anyways, we've taken way more time than I even wanted this video to take. That's all I have for you guys for this tutorial. Next one's probably going to be another web-based tutorial, so stay tuned to that. Hopefully I'll get that up more promptly than I did this one. This one took me way longer than I wanted it to. But please like, comment, subscribe. You can, if you want to donate. You can donate at my website. Thanks a lot, guys. I will see you guys in the next App Inventor tutorial.